and just tell you, last week we talked about habits. We talked about habits. So this week, I want to continue that conversation a little bit. And to do that, I need to pull up my notes. So if you've got your notes from last week on on habit, I want to talk this week about your habit loops. Your habit loops. What is a habit loop? Well, let me explain. A while back, I read a really good book, which was called, and I'll show it to you in case you want to get a copy. It's called The Power of Habit. Anybody read this? By Charles Duhigg. So it's all about habits. I'm going to read you a little section from it today. But it's so interesting because it says that most of our life, our brain is a very efficient machine. And so we spend a lot of time basically on autopilot because our brain is looking for ways to save time and energy, how to be more efficient, things like that. So today we're going to talk about discovering your habit loops, actually how your brain works. And I'm going to give you an assignment to actually work on a bad habit. So here's the book we're using. We'll be talking about it in just a second. So think of a bad habit you have. Everybody think of just one. Okay, everybody got that in mind? If you're a note taker, you could write it down. Or maybe your bad habit is the fact that you don't take notes during calls. Yeah, I'm talking to you. So anyway, that's one to think about. But I'll give you an example. One is some of you are so busy. How many of you feel busy? Anybody? Bulgarians? Yeah, you guys are busy. And sometimes you're just rushing and you're trying to do too much. And the rush to get everything done in one day is one reason that you get frustrated with how you do things. Okay? So rushing around, trying to cram too much into too little time is a problem. And that's a bad habit. Clothiers, you remember the old days, maybe the current days, where you tried to put too many appointments into your calendar, just packing them in, and you couldn't get from one to the other, or if there was a delay or, the bus was late, whatever, you just had issues. So all these habits, whether it's rushing around or whether you smoke, maybe you consider that a bad habit. I would. Think of a bad habit that you've got. I have some that are actually intentionally, they're good habits, but they become bad habits. I know I've referenced one of my friends before I used to work with, but her habit is saying yes to every request that she gets at work. Can you see why that would be a bad habit? I mean, being helpful is a good thing. Being over helpful all the time to everyone is a bad habit. Here's another bad habit some of you may have, is poor self-talk. Does anybody have that? You don't have to raise your hand. But some of you are like, yeah, I really suck. You're right. And that's an example of bad self-talk. That's a bad habit, okay? So you never wake up in a given day and say, hey, you know what? Today I want to really have a bad attitude. I want to continue that habit. And you don't wake up and say, I can't wait to be unproductive today. But you don't do that. It's all on autopilot. So let me give you a couple reasons why bad habits take hold of us, okay? One reason is time pressure is an excuse for neglect, okay? People that are in a hurry don't have time to care for people or clients. They don't have time to improve a process because they have no quadrant 2, if you remember our Covey talk. So that's one problem. The second is that there's a crisis every day. And that's always a great excuse for bad habits. And you look around one day, you wake up and you're just like, oh my gosh, you're so worn out. You're just weary. And you wonder how things got that way. It's because your life is in crisis all the time. And so bad habits just naturally spring up like weeds. Okay, a couple other reasons why bad habits take hold. being off purpose. You know, if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, that's being off purpose. And it's really hard to get on purpose. Unless, I mean, you got to take time and work on that. You may have a lack of goals. If you don't have any goals, you have all kinds of time to develop bad habits, right? So there's another thing that creates bad habits is that you're unaware of your own habit loops, which I'm going to show you here. I'm going to screen share a PowerPoint in just a minute. So be prepared to put it on full screen mode. But if you're on autopilot, like I said, your brain looks for efficiencies. It looks for ways to save time. And so sometimes you find shortcuts that don't help you. Okay. So let me give you, let me tell you about, I'm going to read from this book because I know you like to be read to. But there was a young lady who had a really bad habit of chewing her nails. And not just like, chewing a hangnail here, chewing a little nail there. She chewed so much that her fingers would bleed and she would pull the fingernails off of her skin. It's not pretty. So she went to get help, and she was a patient in a hospital, and they put her into awareness training. Awareness training. So it says most people's habits have occurred for so long, they don't even pay attention to what causes it anymore. This guy that's writing it says, I've had stutterers come in, and I ask people who stutter which words or situations trigger their stuttering. And they won't know because they stopped noticing. So one of my assignments today is when you think about your bad habit, I'm going to give you an assignment to think, what is my cue? What is my trigger that starts my habit loop? Okay, so let me read you about Mandy. What did she do? Here it is. Okay, it says whenever she figured out, they gave her the assignment at the end of the first session, the woman that was treating her said, I want you to go home and find your cue. Okay, and so what she found was the reason why she bit her nails was she was bored. I mean, she had trouble figuring it out at first, and then she said, I think I do it when I'm bored. So the therapist put her in some typical situations like watching TV or doing homework, and she started nibbling on her fingers. And when she'd worked through all of the nails on both hands, she felt a sense, here's a key, a sense of completeness, fulfillment. Yes. All right. That was her reward. So there's a cue that happens. There's a routine people go through, and then there's a reward at the other end. That's why you do the habit. Okay. And hers was just a physical stimulation that she started to crave. And that was just that contentment. All right. So she started noticing that whenever she was bored, she would feel a tension in her fingertips. And they assigned her to carry around an index card. And each time she felt that little cue in her fingertips while she was bored, that tension, she put a check mark on the card. Okay, just took out the card, put a check mark in there. She came back a week later, she had 28 checks. And she was then super aware of what her cue was, okay? Which is what I'm gonna assign you to think about, all right? She knew how many times it occurred during class, while she was watching TV, and she would make a mark. Then the therapist taught Mandy, this is the girl, what is known as a competing response. She replaced the response. Whenever she felt that tension in her fingertips, he told her she should immediately put her hands in her pockets or under her legs or grab a pen, see? Something that would make it impossible to put her fingers in her mouth. Got it? So if she's holding the pen, she can't very well do that and chew her fingernails. So what happened was the cues were the same and the routine was the same. I mean, the reward was the same, but the routine was different. And she completely eradicated her bad habit. Okay? That's the good part of the story. So here's the golden rule. This is the takeaway from today's call. The golden rule of habit change. All right? You cannot extinguish a bad habit. You can only change it. okay? You can't you can't sit and tell yourself, I will not eat 2 desserts. I will not gain weight. You have to replace the routine. You have to change the routine. Just like the woman, the patient, they said, okay, put your hands under your legs or put a pen in your hand so you can't chew your fingernails. That changed the routine. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm gonna go to, let's see. Let's go to share screen. So if you guys have the ability to make me full screen, then I would do that now. Okay, I'm gonna hit share. So I'm gonna see this. We're gonna move you guys over. You see some notes and then you see my PowerPoint. Here it comes. Okay, so I made this just for you. It's very exciting. And it only has 3 or 4 slides. So let's talk about this habit loop in a colorful way. Okay, has everybody got that? Can you see it? Nod your heads. Yes, Revo says, good. Excellent, thumbs up. Okay, so let's talk about what I just described. When it comes to habits, you know, one way a lot of people try to change bad habits is they try to do it through willpower. And you can do that, like discipline, discipline, discipline. But the way to make tiny changes or big ones is to focus on habits and don't try to beat yourself up with new behaviors. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten, right? So if you're like, well, I'm trying to bump my sales up this month, you know, to 40,000 for the first time, you know, I want to do, you have to change your habits. If you don't change your habits, you'll get the same results. So if you get new habits, then you can have this new vision of a new future and you can actually hit your goals. And here's another thing I want to remind you about habits. Everybody is 100% disciplined to their habits. Now that's something to remember. And you're like, okay, well, so what? If you made a list of all the habits, good and bad in your life, you are 100% disciplined about those very habits. When my son was younger, thank God he gave up heavy duty video gaming because he used to literally some days spend hours and hours. I mean, if he got on World of Warcraft, sometimes that was a 10-hour deal when you were fighting, you know, with your community or fighting a boss or whatever. And I would be like, son, this is not good. And he was like, I did not have to wake him up in the morning and say, hey, Luke, it's time to start playing video games. Come on, you got to be disciplined. No, everybody's 100% disciplined to their own habits. All right. So we just get to choose which ones are most important. All right. Thankfully, he changed some of those habits. And when one of his university roommates actually dropped out of college because he was playing too many video games consecutively, he couldn't even go to class. Very committed. So everybody feels 100% disciplined. So all of our habits, whether they're good habits or they're bad habits, they feel natural. All right. So how do we change them? Here you go. This is what I was just talking about. There are 3 steps in a habit loop. The first one is the cue. That's the thought, the feeling you have, something physical that you feel, an emotion that you might feel, and that's what creates your loop. All right? Then your brain, again, creates neural pathways, and it creates a routine to get you to your reward. All right? Now, rewards can be all kinds of things. They can be like in the case of the woman who was biting her nails, it was just a sense of relief or fulfillment. Your reward could be like today, the pool is closed, I couldn't swim, so I went on a long bike ride for the first time in a long time. And my butt is sore because I was riding on one of those little French racing bike seats and my butt hurts now. But when I got up, I was not excited, but subconsciously I am in a routine where I work out at least 4 times a week. If I don't work out, I feel like a slug. So my reward is, if you've ever whoever's worked out and then you get that kind of good feeling when the endorphins are flowing in your brain. Has anybody had that? I know you guys. Yeah. So you finish your CrossFit workout and you're like, whoo, you're tired when you're sweaty, but you're happy and you have a good feeling. That is the physiological reward for your routine of going through the workout. Okay. So most of my habits are that I've tried, the good ones, I try to make almost automatically. Okay. So when I get up, I have a very set routine. Okay. Depending on what day it is. Wake up, load my bag, routine, drive to the swimming pool, work out, good feeling, reward, come home, get out my Bible, get out some quiet time materials, read, pull out my Jordan Peterson book I'm currently mostly finished with, read a chapter in that. So I'm trying to build in quadrant 2. And my reward is when I finish those details every day, I feel like I'm on schedule. I feel balanced. I feel like my life is in control. Okay? So big key here as you think about your habits, and I'm giving you an assignment to think about one of your bad ones. Your habits cannot be changed unless you replace that middle section. See it? The routine. So you may feel a cue like, gosh, I'm going out with friends, and to be sociable, I need to drink. Not just one drink. I need to have a number of drinks in order to, that's your thought and your cue. And then you start the routine. Okay. The reward is kind of that temporary good feeling until the next morning when you're hungover. So you think about what's my cue, what's my routine, and what is the reward. So if you want to start a new habit, you've got to, first step this week is to develop awareness. Awareness. We're going through awareness training. Number 1, notice your cues. Nowadays, people call them triggers. What's your trigger? What's that physical feeling? Is it a pit in your stomach? Is it an emotional, is it a thought you have? You know, it can be anything, but it will cue you. It can happen very fast. And then that's the first thing you got to look at. The second thing I want you to think about when you're thinking about a good or a bad habit is, what are my rewards? What do I get out of this? What does my brain associate pleasure with when it comes to this activity? Is it, on the slide here, I've got relaxation, a sense of exhilaration, a sense of belonging. You know, some of you, in order to feel social, you need to go get with friends and smoke cigarettes, because then that's like, whew, okay, now I can relax. I'm with friends, and there's a certain stimulation and a sense of belonging in that. Everybody's different. Everybody's wired differently. Everybody has different cues and rewards. But the big key here is, what is your routine? What connects that initial thought to the end of the habit? Your routine. You've got, and Tony Robbins would say this if you read a lot of Anthony Robbins, you've got to interrupt your pattern. Your habits won't change unless you replace your routine with a new one. Okay? So that's the key. That's the whole deal. Let me stop sharing, and you guys can go back to looking at each of us and put it on a different kind of screen. All right, so that's how the habit loop works. There's a cue and a trigger that tells your brain to go into auto mode and which habit to use. Then there's a routine, which can be physical or mental or emotional. And then there's a reward. And that reward helps your brain figure out if this particular loop is worth remembering for the future. Okay? The habit loop. Okay, so I wrote down, one thing that I was really bad at, I noticed, because someone called it to my attention. I wasn't even aware. They said, hey, you know what? You interrupt people a lot. You're kind of ahead of them sometimes, and so you'll just finish their sentence or jump on top of what they're saying, talking over them. I did not want that to be a habit. So I had to realize, first of all, just awareness is about half the battle. But bad habits can be anything. And I want you guys to really think through and pick one that you can attack. And maybe you start small. How we eat, how much you sleep has a great deal to do with how successful you are. That could be a habit. If you have kids, how you talk to them, you know, watch your tone of voice. That can be a habit, you know. There was a period where I was frustrated with things and my kids would just say, "Dad, why are you yelling?" I'm like, "I'm not yelling." Well, I think I was, but I just didn't even realize that my volume was elevated. That was a bad habit because I didn't want my kids to think that I was yelling at them because I wasn't mad at them. It was other things. So those are some habits that we know exist. And once you understand that habits can change, you have the responsibility to remake your habits. And they can be rebuilt, okay? Here's the other piece of good news, and I'll kind of start to close here, is that whenever you change a little habit in one area of your life, small wins create other wins, bigger wins. One Cornell professor said that small wins are a steady application of a tiny advantage, okay? So once a small win has been accomplished, he said, there are forces that are set in motion that favor another small win, okay? So small wins, they fuel transformative changes, and it helps give you leverage with tiny advantages. And so, for example, I think I've said this before on calls when we talked about habits. They had worked with people that were what we call morbidly obese. That means they were, I don't know, 600 pounds and above. I mean, big people. And they just, they'd mostly tried about every diet created that was known to man. And they failed, and they went back to their old habit of eating, 30,000 calories a day. It's incredible the intake some of these people eat. So what they decided to do was the researchers said, okay, here's what we want you to do. We want to strengthen. Remember we talked about decision muscles. If you want to develop your muscles, you work out. If you develop decision muscles, you make better decisions. You can also develop your willpower muscles in another tiny part of your life. And it spills over into other areas. So when they, instead of talking to these people that were hugely obese about eating, they said, here's what we want you to do. We want you to get up in the morning and we want you to make your bed. And people are like, oh, well, okay, I think I can do that. So they started off with that tiny habit. They changed their routine. And so that gave people just a tiny sliver of discipline, which they didn't have. And it gave them confidence, which they didn't have. And it built their self-esteem a little bit, and they didn't have that. And so what you find is that people start to make changes, and those people, a lot of them started to lose weight. So if you work on your willpower muscles by noticing your cue, changing your routine, and then the reward can stay the same, but changing your routine, you will find if you work on one habit, it will help you in another area. Like some of you, if you just decided, I know when we talked about money management, if you decided, I know some of you did, Maria, some of you guys, you started to put money away every week, right? You put it in an envelope, or you put it in a jar, or every time you got paid, you put just a little bit away. Well, that is a good habit, and you should have a good feeling, a reward that comes from that. If you do that over the period of a few weeks, you'll notice that you'll get more willpower in other areas because little habits become stronger, and it touches everything. All right, does that make sense? Is everybody mostly with me? Okay, it's not super complex, this concept. It's just something that it would behoove you to make a change. All right, so I'm going to open things up. If we have just a couple minutes, I'm going to open it up. If anybody's got an example of a habit you changed by simply doing something mentally to change your routine, or give us an example of what's your cue. Here's my routine. Here's my habit. It can be a good one too. It doesn't have to be something embarrassing. Does anybody have one that comes to mind?
Hello.
Hello.
Estonian office here.
Yes.
We actually have quite a few people who stopped smoking in this office, and we consider this as a bad habit. Well, I don't know if bad is not a healthy one.
Right.
Bad could be whatever. And we were just trying to figure out what did we replace it with, or what did we change in the mindset.
Like what a new routine would be?
Yeah. And I guess everybody kind of has their own different ones.
Yep.
There are people who are, making push-ups when they feel like they got to go. There are people who just have more willpower when they feel like they got to go. And some people still go. But another big one that was, because it was like 3 of us, or who started it together. So we're all kind of keeping us accountable as well. So I think that helped as well.
Yes.
Like when you're looking for a new habit, then to have accountability partner or people who would do it together with. So I think this helps a lot. So when you have something new in your mind, then I think, it's a little bit easier when it's together with somebody else and going over together.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. And it's absolutely true. On smoking, one thing a lot of people do is just get a stick of gum and chew gum. It's something oral in your mouth. It doesn't involve smoke, but that's the replacement of the routine. I mean, here in the States, they've even got that gum called Nicorette. I think it's got a teeny bit of nicotine in it. So you're like, whatever, but that's one option. But I do think it's, if you guys ever work out, if you're trying to build the habit of being more physically fit, it's so much easier to work out in a group or on a team. I know if my swim team isn't swimming together and I just go swim by myself, I don't go hard, I don't go that fast, I don't go that far. So I think that's a great idea to have some, not necessarily accountability partners, but people who are trying to move in the same direction. Great idea. Well done. Anybody else have a thought or an example? Okay, everyone's happy. So here's the deal. This week, I want you to think about one of your habits that you want to change. And self-awareness, step 1 is to find out what's your trigger. Like, what's the thing that happens right before I engage in that behavior that I don't want to do? If you're talking about a bad habit, there's got to be something starts it. And then you got to figure out, even if it's, you got to interrupt your pattern. Okay. There's a great section in Tony Robbins' book on making change. And it's, he talks about interrupting your pattern because you just get an autopilot. We don't want to do that. So Warren Buffett, one of my favorite people, said this, and I'll close with this quote. He said, "Chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken." Think about that, grasshopper. Chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. Something to consider. All right. Next week, I will be out of town. I will be at my niece's wedding. So I will not be, at this point, able to conduct a call next week. So I'm going to encourage you to get together. If I have time, I'm working on 2 other big projects. If I have time, I'll try to do some kind of recording and post it to Zoom. I don't even know how to do that. But if not, next Monday, I want you to compare notes on your habit that you're trying to work on. If it's something you can share with the group, nothing too scary. You know, like I'm a serial killer and I'd like to change that habit. Okay. You don't need to get help if that's the case. But I do want you to notice what your cues are. What are my triggers? That's step 1. And then how could I maybe work as a group? How could I replace that routine in the loop? All right. To get that reward. All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate you. It's been fun. I will talk to you for sure live in 2 weeks. You're all winners. Love you. Thank you. Good night. Peace out.